He's supposed to be scheduled for a half an hour, and I said, the heck with that half hour. He and I talked about it. He graciously gives us his time. He is the owner of the Grumpy Pete Peterbilt, one of our favorite people in the world, and a founding member of the reconstituted road gang. Good morning to you, Dean Croke.
And one good-looking dude.
Good morning. Great to be with you guys. I'm surprised Dre is back from Sturgis already. It was a quick trip.
Well, by the way, for Dre, the idea of having more than 2 days off in a row is like a lifetime.
Woo!
I can't even imagine what that must be like to work for somebody for like 2 straight years and never get more than 1 or 2 days off in a row and then suddenly have a week. Go ahead, Dre.
Well, one of the main things there, Dean, is why I'm back already is as soon as that first official day started on Friday, we're like, oh, this is great. All right, we're leaving tomorrow. Because we like to get there and get all the beautiful scenic driving and riding and all that in before it gets a little too hectic for our taste.
It's on my bucket list. I'd like to go one year just so I can say I've been there. I know a lot of truckers have got Harleys. I've got some good friends that spend time up there. I'd love to go up there and meet them in their sort of native habitat, as you will.
Yeah, it is something else, by the way. You could actually do one of those Clifford Geertz's thick descriptions. I don't know if you guys ever read that essay called The Balinese Cockfight, where Geertz actually,
No?
yeah, it's a famous kind of essay about how you can actually examine a culture. He goes to a Balinese cockfight, and he actually spends a couple of weeks going over and over again to the same cockfight, the same place that holds it, doing these really deep descriptions of all the people that are there. He kind of analyzes every single person that is there. He goes behind the scenes. He goes into the crowd. He goes outside the arena, and he does this incredible thick description in an attempt to show you how Balinese culture works by looking at one particular event. And I think it would be really cool, and I'm sure they're out there, by the way, if somebody did a deep dive on all the character types and tropes, including longtime fans of Night Ranger that that attend the Sturgis motorcycle. What is it called, Dre? What's the official title?
The Sturgis Motorcycle Rally?
Is it called the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally? That's just straight up. That's the terminology for
And
it.
yeah, pretty much because it goes overall so many of like the surrounding towns and cities. Because like on the coast, you got Cruise on the Coast, and it goes all the way from Pascagoula to Bay St. Louis, and it's a similar situation to this. So it's like, oh, you're going to Sturgis, and that's automatically thinking, oh, you're going to this one town there. No, man, it's all the surrounding towns. You got Rapid City, you got Deadwood, and they all take it very seriously.
Yeah, when people say Sturgis, Dean, and you know this as well, people don't mean the town of Sturgis. What they mean is the surrounding event. When you hear you're going to Sturgis, it's like I'm dropping something off in Sturgis is not the same as I'm going to Sturgis. Go ahead, Trey.
And man, one of the thing is, it's like you're thinking, yeah, you're going to do a little riding whenever it comes to that because there is a lot of beautiful riding around. But when it comes to all the events, it's a spread about to an hour to 2 hours around. Whew, it's a lot.
It's a lot of stuff to unpack. Dean, how are you this morning? Where have your adventures been taking you?
I'm really good. I'm about to speak at Spot Freight here in Indianapolis at a conference talking about the freight market and what we're seeing, what we're not seeing. So, yeah, I'm in Indianapolis for a couple of days. Great city. Like I was out on I-70 last night getting some rollers, as we call it in social media world, of some of the big trucks that are running back and forth. Man, it's a busy section of the country. There's such a big warehouse freight market here in Indianapolis.
Oh, it is. In so many ways, like I said, anytime there is a discussion of tolling that comes up in Indiana, it literally sets off bells and whistles. And I don't know if you got a chance to hear it, but on Monday we had the head of the Indiana Motor. How did they? Outlook, but their trucking association, their guy actually showed up here. And man, anytime there is anything involving tolling or any sort of infrastructure, if it's through Indiana, it's national news. It's just straight up. That's kind of the deal over there. I don't know if you heard me say this earlier, but today is Professional Speakers Day, so. Happy Professional Speakers Day to you.
Finally.
It's one of the many things that you actually engage in and do. What are you talking about, by the way?
Well, I'm talking a little bit about, broad macroeconomic terms, supply and demand. We're seeing some interesting trends on the supply side. There's an acceleration of carriers leaving the industry. But the challenge is for every 10 that leave, 9 join. So the rebalancing of the market is slow. Large carriers seem to have found the bottom in terms of the number of trucks they've got in their fleet. So there's a few trends that we're looking at there, but the bigger issue is trying to figure out where demand is for freight tonnage, and that remains somewhat unsure. We're unsure about where this is going to land. Just this week we saw tariffs announced on India related to their purchase of oil from Russia, so that's going to be a wild card we're going to watch in terms of diesel prices in the next few weeks. The market is pricing in somewhere in the range of 15 to 25 cents a gallon increase because of that. So we can expect diesel prices to go up. So I'm kind of looking at all the things that keep the wheels rolling. On the demand side, what we're seeing. On the supply side, what we're seeing in terms of carriers leaving and going, and then just having a look at where rates are. And really there's no great story there other than they're pretty much exactly the same as what they were in the last 2 years. We're not seeing a lot of lift. There's no volatility in the market. It's just a very wait-and-see kind of freight market at the moment.
Well, and the other thing is, too, when you and I talk, and part of it is because of the world I grew up in, but it's also, there has been an attempt to go back to the future to kind of, recapture an America that existed in the mid-'70s and hopefully kind of recapture it. The problem is that what has me so worried is that it almost feels like we need either a breakout, one particular area where there is a booming market where people can then begin to go to kind of gravitate towards, or a genuine brutal bottoming out, kind of a break that forces a policy change, at the risk of economic, destruction going on. And I keep thinking about the fact that, people forget that for all of the economic struggles of the early 80s, there were sectors of the economy, particularly oil and gas, that people were able to kind of race down and find the action there. And I guess before we actually hit the pledge and national anthem and all that stuff, as kind of a preview, are there any green shoots, and I don't mean for the overall economy, but any places where a hustling entrepreneur might turn their truck to and find some real action?
Yeah, I think given how bloated inventories are, because a lot of importers have pulled forward inventory from overseas and filled all of these warehouses, like around Indianapolis here, I think there'll be some pretty strong demand in that final mile or warehouse to retail warehouse space as we head into, back to school retail season. So I think there'll be some demand. I'll call it final mile, but that could be, a couple of 100-mile radius. So I think there'll be some demand there. The other good news is that new orders for manufacturing, even though they're still in contraction territory, they actually improved a little bit in July. So they were dropping for like 5 months, and they just started to turn up again. And new orders in manufacturing are a proxy for future demand down the road. So that's one green shoot that's kind of very good news for truckload carriers. But, generally the economy still remains in contraction territory, adopting this wait and see. But I think there will be some activity, final mile, warehouse, anywhere where you've got port to warehouse market, like Savannah to Atlanta, Savannah to Jacksonville, those sorts of lanes will see pretty good activity.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking about with that, and I saw that little uptick in the manufacturing stuff, and I'm wondering if a number of the players in the game are saying, you know what, we're going to bet. With all the uncertainty and we don't know which way we're going, now that it seems like maybe sort of kind of in the next few weeks, we're going to see the impacts of what tariffs will do. I think a few of the manufacturing guys are making a bet saying, yep, we might want to begin to, onshore this stuff again and start kind of ramping up in that direction. Yeah. It's very minimal. I don't want to act like, oh, here comes the big manufacturing output. But I think a few of the players are saying, you know what, we've got to choose here, because that's the other thing that we have, and I'd love to talk about today. And you can, if you want to kind of touch on this before we hit this break, you can. The idea that the stagnation point is a disaster too, because people think, a downturn is the worst thing. I sometimes think that stagnation, if it goes on long enough, is a big disaster, because then things wither. And then, you sit there for a while and you keep waiting to either lay people off or hire more people. You keep waiting either to expand or contract. You do nothing, which means that when you finally make a decision, you're not in a good enough position to make it if you've gambled wrong. Are you following me when I say that?
Yeah. I think that's what a lot of people were doing. And I think some of the good numbers we're seeing is that optimism that our worst case scenario didn't happen. the market didn't collapse. We didn't see complete demand destruction after Liberation Day. And I think people were starting to sense a little bit of optimism that maybe we'd been past the worst of it. But then the White House comes out this week and slaps a tariff on India, and Apple had just moved iPhone production to India earlier this year
in response to the Chinese situation. In response, I mean, I'm going to really get on the administration's case here for a second. You don't have to do this. You don't have to go here. But it's like, come on, guys. It's like, all these people said, okay, well, if you're going to put the knife to, China, and by the way, I'm a person who actually thinks we should put a little more pressure on China. And then these guys move to India, and you're like, wait a minute, it's just like, I mean,
wait a minute.
What are you doing? What are you doing? Okay, that's enough of that. Dean himself he's got millions of miles, and they are growing by the minute. People are giving us a call at 615-292-6366. We'll grab those phone calls in a second. Dean, I wanted to give you a shout out, a big thanks to you for introducing us to Chris Orban, who got a chance to drop by the studio the other day. And by the way, one of the great things is you've learned about, having in-studio guests is sometimes you turn and you say, hey, man, you having a good time? I am. Why don't you stick around and join us for the next guest? And his contributions, it makes all the difference. He's a pretty sharp customer. And by the way, I am learning from him and from other people, our good friend Bob Raisler. I keep saying Bob. Mark Raisler. There's a reporter I knew named Bob Raisler. As I learned from Mark, there's a lot of people down here in the city of New Orleans who work in transportation and in trucking who are well worth dropping into the studios as well. So big thanks for facilitating that introduction. I know a lot of our listeners really loved Chris's insights.
Yeah, I've known Chris for about 20 years. He was one of my very first hires many, many years ago. I've been in CEO boardrooms where Chris has been typing 200 words a minute, taking notes, and having an in-depth data analytics conversation simultaneously. He's, along with you, he's one of the brains that I always say, in my head when I'm talking to you. I always go back to the Princess Bride story where, Wesley's talking to Vizzini about iocane powder, and Vizzini says, truly a dizzying intellect. And I always think that. I always think that you don't know that. But whenever I'm talking to you, I'm always saying, gosh, this is truly a dizzying intellect. And Chris is the other one that's like that, because not only is he a trucking expert, when it comes to data science and data analytics, because like me, he's lived inside large truckload and small truckload carriers for 25 years. He's also got an incredible depth of knowledge outside of trucking, which I always knew that he would be perfect for radio if we could get you two connected. And I thought Monday's show was just fantastic. I loved listening to it. It was actually really entertaining to hear you two go back and forward.
Well, yeah, and let me tell you something else too. The thing that, and this is for our listeners out there, and we're going to talk to one in just a second here, Dean, is if you really read between the lines, you haven't got to read between the lines. It's literally gushing out of his pores. He has such a deep well of empathy and compassion. I guess we can call it for the plight of truck drivers, is that much like our friend Brian Wiebold, who we talked to in Texas, is that there is a beginning movement of people who work in the supply chain, whether they work in data, whether they work in sales, behind a desk, on a dock. More and more people are really getting what it is one of the great things about diving into data is you begin to see numbers that begin to back up the idea that none of this works not without trucks, but without drivers. And his well of compassion for how do we improve the quality of life for the men and the women who drive trucks was deeply moving. And it really kind of powered a lot of what happened in the conversation after that and made for a lot of real joy. It's the same place that you and I come from, is that we have this crazy idea that we don't think these men and women are stupid. We don't think that they are one-note Johnnies, and we think that they are successful, striving entrepreneurs. I hate to say, it's funny because a lot of people get on my case about being down about current situations. I'm so deeply in love with this country. I know you are, because you chose, like Ronald Reagan said, you chose a nationality. I mean, you had one before, and you made a choice. And these men and women are so, I don't do this often, but these men and women are so representative of what it means to be an American, whether they are second-generation immigrants, whether they are people who trace their folks back to 1776, like our friend Stroker Ace. It doesn't matter, man. They are deeply invested in the American experiment, and Chris's love of them came just kind of, out of his pores,
Yeah.
which is why he has such a good time with Dave and I, who kind of feel the same way about it. Sorry, that was that moment. I have to go to the. Go ahead. You speak.
Well, I'm just saying, Chris was very clever in that he relied on my interpretation of data, because he would look at data and say, what does it mean? And I could explain to him how the data came about. Because in the data analytics world, if you don't know the context that the data is generated in, the data can be almost meaningless and misleading. And I was able to explain to him the feeling, the emotion. Sick child at home finds its way into the cabs through the rate of brake applications, or the number of times a driver looks in the rear, in the side mirrors. One of the other big predictors of accidents is how many months you are away from your DOT physical, because you're worried about not passing. So Chris was very clever in that he was open to the idea that data on its own wasn't conclusive. You needed to understand the emotional, psychological side of the driver so you can understand what the data meant. And that's why he's been incredibly successful, because he has this empathetic chip in his brain where he can look at data and say, yeah, I know exactly how that comes about, but more importantly, what to do about it. Because if you don't know how it's generated in the trucking world, it's really hard to know what to do about it, because with any data analytics, you get to a point where the customer says, so what, now what? What do I do with this information? And that's where Chris really excels.
Yeah, that's really the thing. I mean, and we're going to talk more about this on the other side. Our good friend Showtime, another founding member of the reconstituted Road Gang, and the man who actually gave us the sign that is behind me. If you ever get a chance to take a look at it, we'll talk about that in a second. He gifted a sign to me, Dean. Yeah. And it's and our friend Showtime is on the scene, lean and mean. Good morning to you, my friend.
Good morning. How you guys doing today?
We're great. And by the way, I know of what you're going to speak. I can't wait to hear you unpack this, Dean. He wants to talk about the Indian tariffs. So, Showtime, you have the floor.
Okay. If I'm correct, part of the reason why we put the tariffs in place is Trump said you need to buy oil from the U.S., and they said, no, we're going to buy it from Russia, and that's what's helping fund Russia's war effort. So they went, okay, you want to do that? Then enjoy your tariffs. So I think that was part of that.
It was.
Yeah, partly. I mean, when Russia invaded Ukraine, India had to buy oil from somewhere, and it went to Russia. 2 points. Russia is the second largest exporter of crude oil in the world, and India is the second largest importer of crude in the world.
Who's first, Dean?
So this is like, I get what they're trying to do, but the problem is that if you say to Russia, okay, imports are going to cost more, we want you to buy less oil, where does India get its oil from? It'll probably go to OPEC nations, right, in the Middle East, where supply will tighten and prices will go up. So the market's already pricing in somewhere between $5 and $8 a barrel increase, which is about, it'll put diesel back over $4 a gallon for us. So that's the problem with this game of chess that's being played. We're trying to get less dependency on Russia for India, but where does India go to get that oil? And that's the problem. It's not like there's an infinite supply of this stuff. Outside of Venezuela and Russia, most of the oil supply is going to come from the Middle East, where they're going to find a way to put prices up. So that's the reality of it.
Yeah, and it's a good point. Like I said, we kind of ran out of time before we hit the break, Showtime, but it is a great point. The thing is, this is the game of what they call that there is how do I put this? There's a thing that Henry Kissinger came up with called realpolitik. He didn't come up with it, but he perfected it. The idea that we are willing to tolerate a little bit of money going to the guys that we don't like because how about this? The real threat, I always believe, in regards to all of this game is China. And to put pressure on the Chinese to improve on their human rights abuses, to improve on their market flooding that they actually end up engaging in is, in fact, I think tariffs can be a great kind of diplomacy stick. The trade-off is, am I more concerned about the Chinese impact on the American economy, or am I more concerned about what's going on in Ukraine? Man, that's a tough call, and that's why people get elected president, because people are like, make that call. But you're absolutely right in regards to it. That was the thing we didn't get to finish up on. You're correct, Showtime. Other than that, man, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm doing a coast-to-coast tour this week. Delivered in Long Beach on Monday morning. Picked up in Vegas Tuesday. Oh, by the way, check your snake Pontchartrain on X. I sent a video as I'm leaving Las Vegas the other day. The Thunderbirds were flying, apparently coming back from practice.
Yeah,
so
and
I got a little snippet of that.
And by the way, thank you for that too, because I actually, Dean, there's a whole bunch of social media now that we have gotten through that opening ceremony where Dean got a chance to meet my mother and father. We'll talk about that on the other side of the break. And now that we've gotten through our first remote, I'm actually going to start reactivating all my social medias because I've got a whole, and Dean, you'll love this too. I've got a couple of appointments over at the Port of Orleans, to start taking the kind of video content and doing it from a railroad and port segment, the way that Dean does a lot of his trucking stuff. Showtime, love you, buddy. And by the way, we have reached out to your friend, your historian friend on YouTube. We're going to be getting him sooner rather than later. I thought you'd think that was cool.
Good. Yeah, I think everyone will enjoy that.
I do too. I will do. And wait till you hear the guy that's coming up in the second half of the show who uses military campaigns as a way of actually handling your business in the present day. Thank you, Showtime.
All right, you guys have a great one. Be careful out there.
Dean and I will return on the other side of this break. It is Road Gang Radio here in the city of New Orleans at the Fastport Studios and over in Indiana, because after all, Dean is one of the founding members of the reconstituted Road Gang. Hey guys, go to shadyrays.com. They got your back.
This is Road Gang Radio, and you're rolling with Jimmy Mack, live from the Fastport Studios in good old NOLA.
Hey, by the way, as that music plays, I wish we could actually get a copy of that music to Dean. He got some really great footage of stuff on the Mississippi River, the riverboat turning a little Mark Twain imagery. Of course, those great giant ships of the sea that actually bring cargo in and out of the United States and all that stuff. You got a chance to spend some time with us down in New Orleans. It was a really fun event.
Great event.
And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed your company then, and you got a chance to meet my mom. One of the really cool things, as I was telling you, and I invite anybody down for this, I tell anybody that is in town for a major holiday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, 4th of July, anything, to look us up and to come break bread with us. Because, Dean, I'm telling you, there is an America that in many ways is an America that people like to pretend existed, that exist at those dinners. We have Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians, military veterans, peaceniks. We also have military veterans who are flaming hippie liberals like my father. All those kind of people, right across the table from one of President Bush's major bundlers. And they all have these long kind of great conversations about, not about, I'm right, you're wrong, or what the latest outrage of the day is, but exactly the kind of conversations that you and I have, we have with Chris Orban, that we have with Dave Nemo, a sense of like, I have never, ever been more delighted than watching my Uncle Ken, who is, former COO of Superior Industries, sit down with my father, who is a former chief counsel for Texaco, sit there completely politically opposite and in complete agreement about the impact of the Federal Reserve and the oil policies of 1980. It's really fun because the food is so damn good. And you got a chance to get exposed to something new, gumbo style, did you not, while you were down here?
Yes, so I was going around the buffet and I had a bowl of gumbo, and someone pulled me aside and said, "That's not how you eat gumbo. Let me show you." And he proceeded to get a big ice cream scoop of potato salad and put it on top of the gumbo. And I'm going, hey, this is weird. Potato salad doesn't go with gumbo in my head. It was wildly tasty. It was amazing, but I had no idea that was a tradition.
Yeah, and there is a restaurant, by the way, as you've been to this neighborhood. You actually, and by the way, our friend Jeff Pierce of Rees Across America is going to be in studio tomorrow. He's dropping by. He does all the programming for them. I was telling him, but you've been here enough. We got 5 coffee shops here, and I mean some of the best restaurants, not only in the city of New Orleans, but in the world or within walking distance of here, including Cafe de Gone, McCarty's Fried Chicken. Which you had, by the way. You had some McCarty's Fried Chicken with us a couple of months ago. But there's a restaurant called Liuzza's by the Track, because there are 2 Liuzzas owned by the same family, and one is just called Liuzza's, and there's a second one called Liuzza's by the Track, because it's right by the track, where a friend of mine walked in. She wanted to eat there, And she walked in, and before we sat down, she said, "Do y'all have potato salad?" She said, "Baby, we're fresh out." And we turned around and walked out the door. She said, "I love you. I'll be back. You always have my business, but I'm going to be here earlier next time to make sure I get a little potato salad in there." And
Yeah.
and those kind of mixing and minglings are a great reminder about why trade is so important, why culture. I don't believe in cultural appropriation. I believe that we just mix stuff up and figure out what works and kind of what doesn't. I'm glad
Yeah.
you got a chance to enjoy that. And those pedophores from the catered pedophores from Dorianax for Nokia. I'm getting in the weeds here, Dean. I'm sorry about that. We got stuff we got to talk about.
That's great.
So what? Okay,
Well,
so go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, food is kind of it's at the heart of everything in Louisiana. Because, Chris Orb and I used to go out to one of our best clients, Dupre Logistics, out in Lafayette. And the one thing they would do all of the time for their drivers at every one of the terminals, all the gasoline haulers would have a cookout or a gumbo cookout, or they'd bring a trailer in they had to do crawfish. So every time we went there, it didn't matter whether we were going out to lunch to eat a po' boy or they were having some sort of event at a terminal to connect with their drivers. The thing that stuck with me after working with those folks out there at Dupre for probably a decade was how central food was to the fabric of the truck driving community and, of course, the broader society. But that's sort of my big takeaway from every time I go to New Orleans is the food.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too because one of the things, gumbo of course starts off as a way of kind of, making something out of nothing. It's the great stone soup recipe of Louisiana, the idea that everybody brings a little something, you figure out what can and cannot go in the pot, and then you kind of go from there. I was kind of curious, you and I talk about festivals all the time. I wonder if there's a way to sit down and break bread with truck driving communities across the country on those big sit downs and try to figure out how things are going, either good or bad, based on what the spread on the table is to some degree. The idea that we don't have a lot of this now because we're not importing it. Because there are things all around the country, a lot of very famous recipes depend upon stuff coming from all the way across the country or right across the border in Mexico because we're so dependent on that. And I often wonder if the final canary in the coal mine when things are going to get really bad is when you have a shortage of a particular ingredient or the ingredient is hyper expensive and you've got to cut back. I just wonder if at some point somebody says, man, I love this recipe, but there seems to be a little less such and such in it today. And that's because they say, well, we had to make it for a lot of people and we had to stretch X as far as we possibly could based on the price. It's just stuff that's kind of worth speculating on.
It's an interesting data point. I'll ask my wife who runs a catering business, her own, and I'll see what she's seeing in terms of order selection, menu selection, and on her wholesale supply side. There may be some data points there we could cover on a later show.
Yeah, and that'd be kind of really interesting. So we talked about the manufacturing uptick, but I wanted to kind of open this up to the larger conversation that you wanted to kind of have today. We still have plenty of time for you to kind of get through these points here. So where should we be looking first? Where is your eye? Where is that all-knowing eye of yours turning towards these days?
Manufacturing. Manufacturing puts about 70, maybe 65 to 70% of the demand on the back of our trucks. So one of the data points that strongly correlates with truckload rates. So the ISM Purchasing Managers Index comes out at the start of each month. It has about in data terms, an R value of 0.92, which means it's a really strong positive correlation with dry van rates. So it's a really good indicator to see where the market's going. And the ISM came out, it's a diffusion index. So under 50 means the economy is contracting, over 50 means it's expanding. It came in at 48, down from 49, so it's still in contraction territory. New orders, though, were up from 46.4 to 47.1. So because it's below 50, the economy is still in contraction, but the rate of contraction was at a slower rate. So that was sort of the good news that came out last week. But there's some challenges there. There's some mixed messages. The people that are reporting on this are talking about cost pressures, being very cautious about where they think the market's going to go. The outlook was really one of caution, operational discipline. Demand remains weak. It's uncertain. When you go through all of the respondent messaging they sent to the market when they're surveyed was, we're really not sure where the market's going to land. So that's why when we look at truckload demand, we just see it being very flat for the rest of the year, which means in an oversupplied market, rates that, it keeps a lid on rates, and there's nothing in the demand forecast that we're looking at that says there'll be a major inflection point either way, which is kind of good news. There's no demand destruction because of the trade war, but there's nothing that's going to lift us off the bottom of this trough. And remember, we've been in a freight recession for at least 2 years, maybe more. You're starting to see the effects of it with dray carriers in California. A couple of big names decided to close doors after multiple years of being in business. You're seeing large truckload carriers close their doors in the dry van space. So I think we're starting to see this next 6 months will be interesting. If demand remains flat, what we're starting to see is capacity start to rebalance, and we're seeing the number of carriers in the industry start to decrease. I haven't seen that before. July numbers showed us that we had more carriers leave the industry than join in the spot market, and it always leads the rest of the market by about 4 to 6 months. So next 6 months is going to be pretty tough sledding, I think, for a lot of folks, but cost control is going to be the key, absent any major increase in demand.
Yeah, and like I said, the best way I have kind of, as I've looked at the economy, I've said, imagine somebody who's not feeling great. They're not feeling great, and you keep taking their temperature, and it keeps coming back 99.8 and 100.2 on a regular basis, where you're like, you're running a little bit of a fever, but I don't want to declare you like really, really sick. And it's almost like everybody says we would like it either to be 98.6 or 103, because we know how to respond to that. We're really not sure to do with this 99.8, this 100.2 sort of fever. We don't know exactly what to do with it, and until you either break towards sickness or you begin recovery. By the way, though, this is really interesting. This economy has been the best example of helping people understand not so much a boom or a bust, but what the term recovery actually means, because the fact that we're not in it is an example of what it looks like when you're neither booming or busting, but not recovering either. This is really a strange cycle of economic news that we're getting. Okay. I did want to break out here real quick, and then we can go back to what thought that you wanted to touch on. I could see that in your face. I can see, Dean, by the way.
The wheels are ticking.
So go ahead and make your point, and then I want to talk about the minimal impact of the English language proficiency as of yet.
Yeah, I want to touch on Showtime's call, because that was a really important point. Absent any increase in demand, spot rates and rates in general are very flat and probably will remain that way for the rest of the year. There will be some seasonality around Thanksgiving and some of those other events, but generally flat between now and the end of the year. What's important is if rates are flat and our operating costs are already higher, this trade war between India and Russia and the US will probably add another 20 to 25 cents a gallon at the pump. Every 10 cents a gallon diesel rises, that increases operating costs by about a penny per mile. So if your operating costs go up 2 cents a mile and rates remain flat and costs are already high, it just puts more pressure on carriers. And that's where Showtime's question is most important, because if oil goes up $8 to $10 a barrel because of this deal with India, we will see it at our diesel pumps within 4 to 6 weeks, and diesel prices are quick to go up and very slow to come down. They're up 36 cents a gallon since the start of June. So I think that's sort of the wild card that I'm watching, because remember 3 years ago when Russia invaded the Ukraine, diesel hit $5.83 in the summer. So one of the really big things that could turn this market on its ear is if diesel prices skyrocket. Now, I hope that doesn't happen.
No.
I hope I'm so wrong about this. But diesel prices are rising and will continue to rise, I think, in the next month or so. What we don't want is a massive surge in diesel prices, because that would crush a lot of carriers in the spot market. Now, on the positive side of that would mean capacity would tighten very quickly and spot rates would start to climb.
Finally.
So there's good news and bad news. Yeah, exactly.
The other thing is the fact that this is why you have to be so careful of how, if you are going to play the tariff game or the sanctions game, it's so important why not to, in the sense that, look, I'll give you an example. If in fact, let's just say we keep on playing this game with the Russians and the Indians, and we kind of play this game, there are ways out of it in regards to, if you don't have tariffs on Europe, then in fact you can start basically flooding them with natural gas. One of the great counters to what the Russians were doing in Ukraine to a large degree was the fact that it was like the Russians couldn't freeze the Europeans out. couldn't play that game with him because the U.S. was basically just exporting natural gas at massive amounts.
Right.
But if, in fact, there are tariffs in place there, how much pressure does that put on the Europeans to then have to play ball with Russia to get their hands on that stuff? Although, given the footing of the Europeans, particularly Macron over in France, I'm not sure that would happen. But this is the kind of games you play when it's across the board sort of penalizing people. Some people got to get a deal. If you want to make this work, sometimes you got to give up something and give people a deal while you put the stick to somebody else. Those are my concerns, that we could actually remember, higher diesel prices aren't as bad as they seem if everybody's working. I mean, if if you literally have crushed capacity, that's fantastic. But that's kind of what we're looking at here right now. We go back to the same old running theme: uncertainty. Uncertainty.
Well, money talks, and we still import oil from Russia. So there's a lot to unpack here. It's a really interesting game that's being played. The problem, Jimmy Mac, is when there's uncertainty and lack of trust in the market, people that make stuff that goes on the back of our trucks don't have any certainty, and they pull back on investments. They're just unsure. So that's sort of what's creating this, is this moving, the goalposts continue to move down the field, and no one can really put a stake in the ground and say, okay, now we're going to build a new factory, build a new plant, hire more people. In fact, they're kind of doing the opposite, adopting this wait and see attitude. So there's some tough times ahead. I still don't see anything that says the market is definitely going to improve, materially. It just looks like more of the same.
Yeah, and like I said, I hate to kind of go back and sound like a broken record. My big concern about that is a lot of people don't understand that there are trucking companies, good ones, that hang on to great drivers even during an economic downturn because they don't want to have to go looking for good drivers when the worm turns. It's what is that thing where you lay everybody off and then all of a sudden the economy finds a breakout phase. Either the price of diesel craters, or the idea that other people go out of business and then the business is there waiting for you to take, and you don't have the staff to actually meet the orders. So you hold on to people, and you hold on, and you upgrade your equipment, and you make these investments, or you don't make these investments. So I'll give you an example. So you let go of drivers and you don't invest in the next technologies because you're in a holding pattern. The economy turns for the benefit, and you're caught flat-footed because you don't have the manpower or the equipment to address the boom that's coming, and that causes people to fall out of the market. That's what the uncertainty causes. Sorry to kind of keep on being a broken record about that. And speaking of broken records, let's talk a little bit about the English language proficiency thing and the impact of that or lack thereof.
Yeah, lack thereof is probably, I've been fairly vocal on this. I predicted it would be a nothing burger way back in March when it happened. The kind of irony of this is that after 2.5 decades of actively recruiting minorities here and abroad, we've ended up with, guess what, a lot of, truckers from overseas, immigrant truckers. Turns out they're not the right type. A lot of people objected to it, but we've actively built this industry around folks that English might not be their second language. That's the reality. That's the economic reality. The numbers for the first month of the English language proficiency testing confirm that. It hasn't had a material impact on rates. Shippers aren't doing what, the self-policing seems to be immaterial. Rates haven't changed. The market's doing exactly like it was before, largely because it's a really small number. It's nowhere near the numbers that some people in the media and large carriers talked about. So out of 207,000 inspections in the first month, only 2.4% had an ELP violation, of which, so there were like 5,000 had a violation, only 1,220 or 0.6% were out of service. So that's 1.2, so it's 1,220 drivers out of 4.5 million had an out of service violation. That doesn't move the rate needle. That doesn't impact capacity. It never was going to impact capacity. So this has been, I think, a self-owned. I've not seen the industry give itself a black eye like this before, because we are now permanently divided as an industry along race, culture, skin color, and now language.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people talk about, we should all work together to improve rates, to improve shipper turn times, to decrease detention times at the dock. Well, wouldn't that have been a better place to spend our efforts on shipper detention instead of drivers' ability to speak English depending on the level. So as an industry, I think we've actually done ourselves a really big disservice, because now, guess what people outside of the truck industry think of truckers?
Yeah.
That they can't read signs, they can't speak English, they're dangerous, they're maniacs. And we've done this to ourselves. That's what really annoys me the most, because of all the things we could have tackled, this was the least important thing that would have moved the needle for us in terms of economic viability.
Yeah, and so I have two hopeful things I want to say, because normally I am absolutely the cell phone I'm kind of with you on, but I am going to say this. If it had been framed as a safety issue, to say, look, this is just one of the many things we want to do to kind of take care of some safety stuff here. By the way, that is valid. We also want to make sure that we're kind of tracking what's going on at the border in regards to cabotage. We just want to kind of make sure of that, because there are a couple of spots in the country where there are some issues with cabotage. But here's the thing that's so funny about it. This is a lot of the big carriers promoting this when they're the ones who are doing this.
I know.
I hate to kind of, and I got some friends in that neck of the woods, some of whom are absolutely, like I said, there are some where I look at them and I go, man, you're doing it absolutely right. And there are others I go, I love you, dude, but you have no right to take that particular stand. Dean is smiling because he knows the people of which I speak. He will not name them either. But that's kind of it as well, too. And the idea that it's like, so that you get somebody like our friend Ramon Dillon having to come on here and actually establish. It's ridiculous that he would have to come on and talk about the ELP, because, first of all, most of the Sikhs come from places where English is, if not the second language, the first language. But to have him have to kind of grovel like that, and us being like, no, we just wanted to know what you're seeing out there, because I have to tell you, if you talk to most immigrants, second generation ones who are driving, they're like, absolutely, you got to be able to speak English. Yeah. Nobody's questioning that. But my other green shoot of hope too is that 9-point thing that the DOT issued under Duffy, when he, the idea that some of that may move the needle. We were joking about this with Jamie Jones. Dean, I'm telling you, I'm just at a point where I'm terrified of them actually finally getting the parking done, a real reform to parking, and then finding out it cures that it sets off a cascade of lifestyle improvements. It is it is my big terror, because while I'm a big fan of, rather than being angry you're late for the party, let's celebrate the fact that you made it. If it all comes down to parking solves a whole lot of other lifestyle issues, I'm going to be really angry. I'm going to be like, why didn't you do this sooner? Why didn't you take care of this,
I think it's hard to have any of these discussions without talking about driver pay, rates, because pay and rates kind of drive everything, right? They drive how people behave on the roads. Speed is a big issue. It determines, your road speed has a big impact on the rate per mile you charge. It's a big difference between a non-speed limited truck at 600 miles a day versus a fleet at 400 miles a day that's speed limited at 65. So it's hard to have this conversation without talking about the economics of the industry. And I think I think we missed the point when we thought that the reason that rates were low was because we had all these immigrant truck drivers like me. Yeah. I can't wait to be pulled over and be English language proficiency tested with my Australian English. That's going to be funny. Yeah. He's going to say what? What did you say?
One more time.
One more time. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like I said, I continue to kind of monitor this. And like I said, there were some, in regards to making the case, look, we just want to improve safety on the highway. And of course, everybody wants to avoid what happened on 70 in Colorado. Everybody wants to avoid that kind of stuff. A lot of people want to avoid, some of the stuff that's going on in regards to a couple of crafty customers from south of the border and a couple north of the border who are engaged in some cabotage activities and all that kind of stuff. But it's not a silver bullet. That's the other thing, too. It's not a silver bullet for what ails us. And it goes back to the same thing, too. And by the way, I'm an opponent of speed limiters because I'm a big fan of the flexibility these men and women need. That being said, I think everybody would be amazed if you improve the rates, how few people actually had to speed, except for those times when they're trying to kind of extricate. When I say speed, I mean do the actual speed limit and not be limited. Right. You'd be amazed. And I would love to hear the chat, by the way. Some people are actually participating over there. It's the truth. If I knew that the rates were better then you would not see any necessity to speed, and the few that do would be taken care of in short order. If, in fact, we were actually focused on what Chris talks about, what you talk about, what Brian Weebold talks about, what Dave just lives in, if we took care of the quality of life of these men and women, you wouldn't have need a discussion of a speed limiter. It wouldn't even need to come up.
It goes back to my point about detention time on docks. Like spending 6 hours on a loading dock for 14 pallets, that causes you, Chris and I have done the data, Jimmy Mac, we've done the data analysis that show that when accidents happen, in 30% of the occasions, the driver used the word waiting as he was sitting on the loading dock. And what happens is if you're waiting and frustrated because you're not making miles and money, you go out on the road and you take chances because you're rushing to your next appointment. You have a higher number of hard brake events, in the inevitable accident happens. So you've got to go back to the viability of the industry is at the core of improving everything, because if we're held up and we're paid by the mile and we're not paid for the first hour and a half of unloading or loading, what we do is we tend to drive faster. It's well documented that when rates are low, we do more miles per year and we drive faster. There's no question about that. That's at the heart of
get to the next
safety.
rate. Yeah, the thing is, if you think people are speeding and driving too fast or cutting corners, it's because they're driving to the next rate. They're trying to stock rates as opposed to enjoying the rate that they have, and that's the thing, you know.
Well, the problem a lot of folks have is they focus on the rate per mile, not on the revenue per truck day. Right, so if you take a $2 per mile rate and it's a 600-mile haul, you have to get that load off that day and get repositioned. If that load stretches over 2 days, it's $1 a mile, 600 miles in 2 days. You are way behind your $1,200 per day truck target. And that's how I think that gets back to how you think about how you run the business. I know there's a lot of folks on this call right now that listen to the show that focus very heavily on the revenue per truck day. They need 3,000 miles a week. They need $6,000 gross revenue a week. How do I get the work done? As opposed to I need a rate per mile. And I think that's where the industry gets it wrong, because a lot of new entrants are coming into the industry not thinking like that. They think rate per mile, one load at a time. That's not how you build a successful business.
And think about, and we got to wrap this up now, Dean, but think about why we didn't get a chance to see our friend Junker at the party. You know what I'm saying? Look, Jerry, our friend Jerry, who got down here, he, of course, does some driving for the Mart of Wally. But like Junker couldn't make it down here because he could not find something when he got down here to get back out of here. And that makes a big, and the whole Reeves Across America strategy is helping men and women find rates both on their approach and on their exit, because they're giving up a lot for the week and a half they spend, sometimes more, with our friends from Reeves. And that's the big understanding is people have to stack individual rates on top of each other because they're focused on how much am I clearing a week. I'm repeating what you said, but in my own way. How much do I clear this week as opposed to how many miles? Because it just ain't cutting it. It just ain't. Because if the miles are the same load, you're screwed.
Right. I mean, you can take a loss on some lanes and some loads, but at the end of the month, it's got to equal what your target is, right? Because the reality is freight moves in ebbs and flows. And Junker may just have found that around the opening of the studio, it was a very slow period for outbound freight, or maybe the equipment type didn't match. It's hard to get everything to line up in trucking, but you've got to take the good with the bad sometimes. But if you know what your strategy, if you have a strategy, and I think that's the most important part, if you know what your target is, you might say need $3 on this mile, or take $1.50 on this return leg, and it's going to net out at $2.30 a mile, or whatever it is. That's how I think you've got to play this.
Yeah, and by the way, that's why when he told me he couldn't make it, I was disappointed, but at the same time, utterly empathetic and fully understood. By the way, really quickly, our friend Showtime says, morning, kids. He wanted to give you a sense of this. This week, I started in Chandler, Arizona, Sunday to Ontario, California. Unload Monday at Long Beach, California. Load Tuesday in Las Vegas. We'll deliver tomorrow at the Orion Township, Michigan tomorrow. Lots of stuff. He's going to head on over to the Port of Baltimore Saturday. Unload Monday in Highland Park, Illinois. That is the life of a professional truck driver right there for you, Dean. Absolutely. My friend, we never have enough time, despite the fact that as a founding member of the reconstituted Road Gang, we give you a little bit more, but it means we'll have plenty to talk about next time. Great to see you too, man.
Likewise, this is fantastic. Great show. Thanks for having me, as always.
Thank you, sir. I give Dean a wave because I can see him and he can see me. I'm going to hang up the phone now. It's good to see you, brother.